the title of my message today is Offensive Offerings. Offensive offerings. I was going to do a show of hands of how many of you have been offended by an offering at any point in your life, but that's probably all of our hands, including me. Offensive offerings. When I was in high school, I went on a mission trip. And I went out of the country. I went to El Salvador, and I'd never been out of the country before. In fact, I'd never really been out of like kind of the Bible Belt before. And so it was like a big deal for me. And even beyond that, being in another country, I'd never been somewhere where they spoke a different language. I'd never been somewhere where I'd seen extreme poverty up close. And that was something that I saw in El Salvador. And so we were there, we were building this church, and we were doing a VBS for kids in the streets. And when I was there, it was just, we'd bus out every day from kind of where we were staying to where this church was, and it was overwhelming to see people, which is something I'd never seen before, living in trash huts that they'd built on top of a landfill. And it was, it shook you, right? Like it was just something that I'd never really seen before. I'd never even seen pictures of it before. This was back in the time before the internet, right? So this is just something that was very shocking. And I think even what astounded me even more than seeing that was being surprised by how smiley these people were. Like just, they seemed happy, but they were living in very extreme poverty. And so we were there for about 12 days, almost 2 weeks. And at kind of the end of our time together, the missionary that we were with was like, hey, these people are so grateful. They want to do something to say thank you for being here. And so they were going to cook us dinner. And I remember that night, like we bussed out to this area, and it smelled great. It smelled amazing. And the missionary sat us down before we kind of like went out to see all the people, and was like, hey, there's a couple things, like 2 things you need to know before we go out there. The first thing is that we are having tacos, okay? Which of course we cheered for. How are you not going to cheer for tacos, right? That's amazing. Like even some of you are just hearing that now. You're like, I wonder if we could have tacos later. That sounds amazing. I love that. And so that was the first thing. But there was a part 2 of the first thing, which was, and these tacos are made out of cow brains. Okay, to which kind of like it gave you a mixed feeling where you're like, I don't know, you know what I mean? And people started looking nervous and uncomfortable, like maybe we don't want to eat these tacos. I don't know about that. Like that doesn't sound like something appealing to me. And then he told us the second piece of information was that he said these people wanted to do something meaningful for you, and so they pooled their money. And what has been spent today is of these 4 families, they pulled together a month's worth of resources in order to feed you tonight. And I remember hearing that and just feeling completely blown away by such an unbelievable act of generosity, and also how much happiness that it brought these people to help us. And I think particularly so because I was a teenager at the time, and this is maybe just my unique story, but I was very selfish as a teenager. That's probably something that was just me. Some of you have teenagers in your house, and you're like, that's weird. Ours are very not at all thinking about themselves. But I remember at the time, it was such a confusing cocktail of emotions. Like I felt grateful that they did this, but I also felt kind of guilty. I felt like, is it right? Is it even right to accept this? I mean, like we should be giving to them, not them giving to us. And the heaviness of the whole thing, it got me. I don't know if you've ever gotten emotionally caught off guard in a situation. And so I'm sitting on this curb, and I'm eating these tacos, and I start crying, right? And I'm just so overwhelmed that I was like trying to fight it. Like I didn't want to cry. But I feel like when you do that, it's just worse. Your body's just like, oh, this is happening, okay? Like, we can do this however you want to. And so the snot rockets are coming, you know what I mean? And getting into the tacos. And, it's like your body's just like, we can do this however you want to. Like, you can do it the easy way or the way that makes you look even extra ugly. So, like, whatever, fight as much as you want. So I'm, like, crying. And then I kind of become, like, aware of my surroundings and realize this girl that came with us on the trip, is like, she's sitting there, and I don't want her to see me crying. And she's like really pretty, and she was like this cheerleader, and I'm like, I kind of want to impress her, and I don't want her to see that I'm like having this weird moment. And then I look over and I notice that she's also crying. And so I'm just like, oh, I feel this sense of relief, and I also feel this like weird sense of connection that we're having this like really meaningful moment together. And I look over, and I'm just trying to think of something to say, and I say, I'm like fighting back tears as I'm saying, I'm like, I can't believe that they did this for us. And she looks back at me and she's crying too. And she says, I can't believe I am eating cow brains. This is so disgusting right now. I hate this. And then she said something, I'll never forget. She goes, Britney Spears would never be subjected to this. And I was like, which gives you a lot of information about when I was in high school, right? And what was important at that time. This is like shaved head, crazy out the window Britney, right? Like this was like when Britney was, just it, And I had this sense of like, you and me, we're having very different moments right now. Like I thought our crying was connected, but it couldn't be further apart, right? And the reason why I bring this up is because I don't know if you've ever had someone in poverty show you extraordinary generosity, but it's a weird thing. You find yourself kind of thinking like they have nothing. Like how are they giving? Like how is this happening? Like and how do they have so little and are so happy to give so much? Like it just doesn't even make, like what am I missing? Like what do they know that maybe I clearly don't know? Because I think this conversation that I had with this girl while we're eating tacos in El Salvador, I think we all have this conversation with ourselves inside of our own head a lot of the time, right? I think we have both of these competing voices within us. One that's saying like, I want to be grateful for and give from what I've got. And then we have this other voice that's saying like, I've got to get my hands on something more, better, or different, right? And both are talking at the same time to us about what life is about and what it really means to be happy and fulfilled. And the question is, which of these two voices that exist within you are you most listening to? Which one are you leaning into? And it's so much easier to like listen to the second one, isn't it? I mean, we don't set out to. It just kind of like we just kind of naturally do. Especially when you're consistently aware of like all these people that have so much more than you. Or at least, I mean, it seems that way. And I think this is the problem with comparison. The problem with comparison is that we compare ourselves with the wrong parts of the wrong people. And then we end up feeling deflated and frustrated because we're so preoccupied with what we don't have that we fail to make an impact with what we do. And maybe you're thinking like, yeah, okay. I mean, that's great. I mean, I would like to make an impact and serve and give and help the world be a better place and all that Care Bear stuff. Okay, that's great. But like, you know what? Like my life is not, I mean, it didn't really go the way I thought. I mean, I thought I would be further along by now. Okay, and achieved more and be happier and less chubby. Okay? I thought like my marriage would be way better or I would have found someone by now, right? Like, I thought way more people would have way more respect for me. It's like I want to do all that stuff, but it's like I've got my own stuff going on. Like I could use some help too. And after I get what I want, then maybe I will be able to try to help others get what they need. And we all tell ourselves this, but like, is that even true? Or are you like me in the way that like, the line of how much you need to get in order to give keeps moving on you. Right? It's like, well, once I get that, then I'm going to be able to give to others and really help. And then it's like you get a little closer and you're like, that was a premature estimate. And so like, I really need a little bit, and then when you kind of move a little closer to that line, you're like, you know what? But here's the deal. It's more complicated than I like at first when I set the goal. And so like, I need to and it just keeps shifting and moving. And here's the question that I want you to wrestle with today. I think God wants you to wrestle with today. Could it be that your biggest problem is that you're too focused on your problems? Like, could it be that some of what you need only surfaces when you're sacrificing to serve someone else? Like, what if that were true? It feels confrontational, doesn't it? Like, just asking this question almost is borderline offensive. Imagine saying this to someone in crisis. Okay, just for a minute. Like, seems like you're really going through a rough time. Like, things have been really hard and you're stressed and depressed and like so many things aren't going your way. You know what would help? Get your eyes off yourself and look for some ways to help and serve and love and give to other people. And for most of us, if someone said that to us, we would be like, you better shut your mouth. You better step back, because I can still reach you from here. Them fighting words. Like I need sensitivity. Like I need, like I'm being vulnerable. I need you to lean in, and none of those things are going to help. Okay, I need people to help me. I need people to be sensitive to me. I need people to give to me. And yet, even though we might not like it, this idea that just maybe your biggest problem is that you're too focused on your problems, like that there's a lot more truth in that maybe we want to admit. And yet that truth is never uncomfortable. And so I want to show you what I'm talking about. There's this story that's in the middle of this letter that was written to the Corinthian church in the first century, and was written by the Apostle Paul. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there. And I want to give you just a little bit of backstory to kind of understand what we're about to read together. In the early days of Christianity, there were a handful of churches that had been started or planted across the Roman Empire. And they were all different shapes and sizes and demographics, but they shared the same basic core beliefs and values. They were very unique, but they were unified. And at the time that this particular letter was written, one of these communities was being heavily persecuted. And so the leaders of this church, that was one church, but they had all these different locations, they decided it was going to be a good idea to take up an offering to help. And so they started with the biggest and wealthiest of all of their faith communities, which seemed to make sense. And they those people seemed like they had the best chance to be able to contribute something on a big level. But when they got to churches that were mostly made up of people who didn't really have much, or who were going through a lot of issues of their own, they ran into this very real ethical dilemma. And that is like, is it even appropriate to ask people who are poor and hurting to give to others who are poor and hurting? Like, what do we do with that? Like, isn't that offensive? Like, wouldn't that be really awkward and uncomfortable? Like, hey, man, there's some people that are they're poor and hurting, and I just wondered, and they're like, man, I'm poor and hurting. But you need to shut your mouth. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's not going to go down well. I don't want to be the person to do it. Like, and I don't want to make anybody feel guilty or less than just because they might not have as much to give as other people, and like they can't be as much a part of it as they want. So these church leaders just decide, you know what? We're just not going to ask them. We're not going to ask them. I don't want it to get weird. And so they didn't ask them, but it got weird. Because what happened was the people in Macedonia when they realized that they weren't being asked to contribute, they because they were also in need, they got really offended. They wanted in. And what happened was when they got permission to give and contribute, not only did they give, but they blew everyone away with the amount they gave and the joy with which they gave it. Let me just read this to you, because I think this is such an astounding story. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, starting in verse 1, I'm going to read from the New International Version, the NIV, this morning. And it says, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity." What an interesting sentence, right? Severe trials and extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity, right? That was not the two words I thought that they were going to write there, right? Let me ask you something. When you experience those two things, severe trials and extreme poverty, what wells up within you? If you're anything like me, it's not like rich generosity naturally, right? What a surprising twist to the end of like that sentence. Like I'm the opposite. Like when I get backed into a corner, like when nothing's going my way and all my dreams are imploding and I feel like people are out to get me and my bank account is pretty much always overdrawn and my credit cards are maxed and my kids are like, I feel like they're yelling at me all the time, and I just found out my cat has cancer. Some of you are like, should I laugh at that? I don't know. Does he? I know he has cats. They don't have cancer. I just want to let you know. I'm just giving you an example of life. When I'm in this sort of a situation, like what wells up within me generally isn't, you know what, I wonder if there's an offering somewhere I could give to. There's got to be somewhere I could serve a little bit more. It's not even that I feel like I should. It's like it's welling up within me. Like I just got to do it, you know? No, that's not. No, what wells up in me is like anger, right? At God or life or other people, like self-pity maybe. Frustration, depression, crippling anxiety, bitterness. That's why what these people do is referred to as grace. Like, let me tell you about the grace on these people's lives. Because what they do is superhuman. It's the opposite of what we think is going to well up. There's something breathtakingly godlike about it. It's generous beyond human ability. It's tapping into something that is divine. It says in verse 3 that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. Okay, so the people who were so poor and going through so much on their own that nobody wanted to ask them didn't just give, they gave as much as they were able. That's crazy to me, right? Usually I'm looking to give the minimum I can give and still get points, you know what I mean, for participating. Do you know what I mean? Like that's usually, I'm like, what's the smallest tip I could leave and not be considered a jerk? I mean, what is that? I know it's somewhere in there. I don't know. It's like I don't want her to think I'm cheap or, you know, this waiter to like be upset. I don't want the people around me to be like, gosh, that guy's a jerk. Like I don't want to get crazy though. I mean, like what's kind of that like threshold where I can still be seen as generous without really having to like get generous? You know what I mean? Like I don't, you know, what are the minimum number of chores I can do around the house and still be seen as a team player? Like I don't want to be doing a bunch of stuff. I got things I want to do and goals I have, but it's like, I don't want to be like, you don't ever contribute anything around here. It's like, I don't need that gorilla voice in my life. Like, what is the threshold? What is it to where, if I meet this expectation, and we both know I'm not going above and beyond, like, if I could just get there, I'm great. But, like, these people are giving as much as they're able. But they don't just do that. It says they give beyond their ability. Like they gave more than anyone thought they'd be able to, including themselves. In fact, they pleaded for the privilege of sharing. Who are these people, right? I mean, like, these are people that are saying, like, even though I need help, like, I'm begging for you to let me help. I mean, this doesn't happen very often, at least to me. Maybe this happens in your life. You run across people. I can't remember the last time my staff came to me just stressed, and they were just like, Adam, you got to help me. I don't even know what to do with all these volunteers. Like, these people are coming. They are begging to be on my team. And I am like quadruple booking people. I got no more jobs for them. And they're like, just give me a dirty job. Give me a job nobody wants to do. Like, I'm pleading with you for the privilege of serving. You know, that has not happened once since I've been here. Like, not even one time. And that, I mean, some of you are like, are you exaggerating? No, that's really true. Like, it is never, ever. I've never had an encounter where, like, somebody came up to me and was like, Pastor, please, I'm begging you, you got to let me participate in this offering. Please, take the check, please. And I was like, no, we have too much, okay? Your begging is no good here. We can't accept it. We've run out of vision. People are like, this is Chris Sonson's church, right? What are you talking about? It's never happened, right? These sorts of stories that this person is writing about are fascinating to us because our first instinct is to say in this situation, like, whoa, hold up. You can't be giving to others. Others should be giving to you. And so why are these people doing this? Like, what might they know that we don't know? And I think part of it is that they have woken up to a realization that it takes a lot of us a long time to realize, and it's this, that when I'm overly focused on me, I feel empty. When I'm overly focused on me, I feel empty. Now, like, you need to focus on yourself to a certain extent, okay? Like you need to practice healthy self-care. Like, denying that you have any needs in the service of others isn't healthy either. And it's going to leave you drained and depleted and bitter and angry. And some of you are like, I'm there right now, okay? But over-focusing on your problems is a big problem. In fact, many psychologists agree that depression and narcissism are two sides of the same coin. Like, they're both the result of being too focused on yourself, just in different ways, in opposite directions. Like, both lead to disconnection and dissatisfaction. Narcissism disconnects us through arrogance and anger, and depression disconnects us through self-pity and sadness. Narcissism is that voice in your head that says, like, I'm important. I demand to be heard. Do it my way. Give me what I want, right? And depression, it's the same things, but like flipped. It's like, I'm not important. My voice doesn't matter. No one sees it my way. I'll never get what I want. Some of you are like, I feel like I bounce back and forth between both of those voices like every day, and that is called bipolar, okay? So welcome to the perfect place for imperfect people, okay? Now, these people, due to their circumstances, these Macedonians, they might be more prone to depression than narcissism, right? Because they're in great trials. They're experiencing extreme poverty. And so how do they tunnel their way out? Through giving. What? How are you tunneling out of depression through giving? Like, what? Why? And it's because of this truth that often it takes us a long time to realize and a lot of life to live before we end up coming across, and that is that contribution is the antidote to depression. Contribution is the antidote to depression. In fact, that's in large part what depression is. It's the belief that I have nothing to contribute. My contribution doesn't matter. And I'll tell you this morning, that's a lie. But any lie feels true if you tell it to yourself enough. Because your brain only listens to you. And so how do you combat that lie? You combat it by proving that it isn't true with your actions, which isn't to say that you should ignore the pain points in your life. The idea isn't to pretend that you are not limited or that life isn't tough or that certain situations aren't fair. It's realizing that despite all that, you have something to contribute. You still have a purpose. You can still make a big difference. Your uniquely flawed story still counts if you lean into it. See, what makes a truly remarkable story, one that is worth leaning into and listening to, one that you will be inspired by. A truly remarkable story isn't someone doing a lot without any limits. It's someone doing a lot in spite of their limits. Like, those are the stories we want to hear. Nobody cares about a story of, like, this guy, he had everything I could ever want, and he was gifted and handsome and had every opportunity imaginable. And everyone thought, wow, you're going to be successful. And you know what happened? He was, and everything went his way. The end. Like, what a horrible, why did I come to this movie, right? This is the worst. No, we don't, that's not a good story. We don't care about that. It's also because we know it's not real. We think it's what we want, but we don't. And I just wondered this morning, like, what if you decided to stop complaining about what you don't have and start contributing with what you do? Because I think this is what God is trying to wake you up to, is that the potential is found in you abandoning your depression and you abandoning your narcissism and you leaning into your contribution. But the story doesn't stop there. This letter written to the Corinthian church, I mean, these people had more than most other people had, and they always had these big intentions to give, but they would get distracted by their own self-interest, and then they would forget or they wouldn't follow through. And so Paul says to them in verse 7 of the same chapter, he says, since you excel in everything, right? Like you're good at so many things, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love that we've kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. In other words, man, you're great at so many things, and you have so much knowledge, and you have such a big heart, and like, man, you're so good at so many things. But here's the thing. You have this tendency to want to be generous and to say like, oh yeah, no, we believe that it's better to give than receive. But I just got to like just be real with you and just say like, but you're not giving. So do you believe that? Because how you behave is what you believe. I'm just like not seeing it. Again, I'm not commanding you, okay? I'm not trying to shame you. I'm trying to inspire you. Like, man, if these people could do so much with so little, I just can't help but I just imagine what could you do with all that you have access to? I just wondered, like, I wondered if you could start brainstorming about the possibilities and how that might, like, motivate you. You know, what he's telling them is that, ironically, those who had the least already gave the most. And what's crazy is not really much has changed from then till now, because statistically, in the United States, those who make the most and have the most actually give the least. Which is fascinating. But Paul goes on. In verse 9 he says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. And he's saying like, hey, be inspired by the Macedonians, but don't just be generous because they're generous. Be generous because God is generous. Be generous not because you're comparing yourself to other people and you're like, oh man, they out-generoused me. Now I got to do this, or everyone's going to think I'm a jerk, I don't want to do that. Be generous because you serve a generous God who open-handedly gave you everything good that you have, and you're made in his image, and you are made to reflect him. And that's when life is at its fullest, when you step into the God part of yourself, and you begin to reflect him. Like, don't do it because they're doing it. Do it because that's what God does, and you're made to be like him. Then he says in verse 12, for if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. What does that mean? I know it got like a little old English Shakespearean there for a minute. Some of you are like, what is this? What he's essentially saying is this. You're like, if you have a willing heart and you want to be generous, don't feel like you got to give something you don't have. Give what you have to give. That's it. That's the only expectation. Like, it's not about how much you contribute, it's that you contribute. Like, the point is to get out of your own bubble, to get out of your own head, out of your own wants and needs and desires, and realize that you are a part of something that is so much bigger than you. And when you care about and sacrifice on behalf of the good thing that's bigger than you, no matter how big the part you have to play is, it's a big deal, and it will make you better. The Macedonians, like, they'd already come to understand this. This is why their story is the illustration. They understand that being a part of something is beneficial to them, that it's making them better, that it's who they were meant to be. They already understand in their church that contribution is the antidote to depression. But Paul is writing not to the Macedonians, but to the Corinthians. And what he's pointing out to them is that the opposite is also true, that contribution is also the antidote to narcissism. The same prescription combats two different diseases, because the reality of it is they're just different sides of the same coin. They're different strands of the same virus. And the reason it's important for you to know this is that a lot of times I think we can sit back and wonder, like, when we're asked to give, when an offering is collected, when a serving need is made known, I think we can begin to kind of put up our walls and think like, why do you need me to do that? Why does God need me to give so much? Like, how come why is this such a big deal to him? And I'll just be honest with you and say, God doesn't need you to give, you need you to give. God is completely sufficient in and of himself. Why does he tell you that you need to take part of what you have and part of who you are and bring it back to put it in service of something that is bigger than you, acknowledging that it's not yours to begin with? Why does he need you to do that? Because it's best for you. It's what you need. Why? Because all of us have this tendency to lean in our lives toward either depression or narcissism. We can't help ourselves. We can't help but get caught up in comparing our lives and ourselves and our experiences and what we have and where we live to everyone else. And when you give, your contribution becomes this medicine that cures your condition, and you need it to become who you were meant to be. Because the truth is, your happiness is found in the areas you collaborate in for the common good. So don't let the size of your part keep you from being a part. And don't let other people tell you that your part is too small in order to do something big. Because the Macedonians weren't included. And guess what? They gave more than anybody. We don't really have any understanding of like how the puzzle pieces add up. And that's the point. That's the point of the church, is that when we all come together and we begin to contribute together, that something beautiful happens. Something that blows us away. Something that extends beyond our expectations. And you need this because what was true of the Macedonians is true of you. You ought to be more offended by not being included in a generous effort to help others than the other way around. And much like the Macedonians, when you commit to following through, I think you'll end up discovering that you have a lot more in you than you originally believed. That you have a lot more to contribute than you thought you did. And that you needed to give more than you knew. That when you thought you were helping them, you were really medicating you. And this is why we will never feel ashamed or guilty or uncomfortable for asking people to give here at South Hills, to serve here at South Hills, for a couple of reasons. One, because we think what we're doing is changing the world. It's making the world a better place. And this is part of the reason why I would encourage you, if you haven't thought about this yet, to come tonight to Dream 2019, because we're going to talk about what we spent the money that you gave on this year. And if I gave here, and I did, I would want to know the answer to that question, okay? We're going to tell you the lives that were impacted and the stories that were shaped, and we're going to give you a picture of what we're going to do next year. And so I don't feel guilty for that reason. I also don't feel guilty because the reality of it is that when we're asking you to give, what we're saying is we love you enough to challenge you to do things that are healthy for you, even though you may be frustrated with the ask. Because we want you to be all that God has designed you to be. And you will be a mutation of your created self if you don't give. This is who you are. And we want you to wake up to that reality. And that's what I want to pray into your life today. Would you bow your heads across this room as we close this portion of our service together? And then we're going to give you an opportunity to give with us today. God, I am grateful for all that you have given to me. And God, in this moment, I pray that we would feel a sense, regardless of what trials we find ourselves in, regardless of what poverty we imagine ourselves to be in the midst of. God, I pray what would well up within us is a sense of gratefulness, of gratitude towards a good God who gave us every good thing that we have. And God, that there would be this sense that we want to give. God, you never ask us to pay anything back, but you invite us to pay forward the gifts that you have given to us. And God, I pray in this moment today that we would have this sense that you are doing something in our midst, that we are close, that we have tapped in to an awareness of the prescription that's going to remedy our broken condition. And God, a big piece of that is taking what we've been given and giving it back. And God, I pray that you would make us a generous people, not because you need it, but because you've called us to co-create with you the world, to become what you have always imagined for it. You've given us a part to play. God, we are your co-contributors. And God, as we partner with you, God, may we come alive in ways we hoped existed but had never found before. It's in Jesus' name we pray. And everyone said, amen. Amen.
Amen.